if I can get my screen to move. There, here we are. So the first one was kind of the pre-planning planning. You know, what are our objectives? How do we choose the objectives for marketing for the coming year? Which digital tactics make most sense? You know, where's our opportunities? What's our time? What's our budget? Some different ways to think through that. And now we're on to webinar 2, where we're talking about customer value. So that's one way to achieve growth is within your book of business, within your current accounts. Next webinar, webinar 3, we don't have a date for it yet. We should have a date in the next week or so. We'll talk more about green growth. How do you get new clients? What digital tactics are appropriate for that? And then finally, how do we make digital marketing part of everyone's job? Okay. So here we are, digital marketing for customer value. Just a couple of review slides from the last webinar. So we talked about these in depth. I'm going to kind of go by them fairly quickly. We all do this. You know, we want to grow next year. We want to grow 5%, 10%, or whatever. We put a number on it. That's the top down. But then you have to ask yourself, what do we really need to do to make that happen? It isn't just going to happen because we put a number on it, right? So how are we going to produce that? And we had this worksheet, and we made it available on a download if you want to use something like this. And we do a gap analysis. So here's where we ended the year. That's the red box up top. How many clients, how many policies, what's your revenue and premium per account? You could do it either way. Then you get some numbers. You put in some numbers for retention. What do you think the rate increases are going to be next year? That kind of thing. It's just a worksheet, right? And what we pointed out last time is 5% growth really means 15% more sales production than we did the year before. That's because we don't end up, where we end up the year isn't really where we are going to end up because of retention and some things like that, right? So where you end up the year really isn't your baseline. You need to kind of back out what you're going to lose. We all lose a little bit of business over the course of the year. So this one, and this, when we walk through this example, this is a personal lines, I believe, example. We could go through the same worksheet for commercial lines and put in some numbers. So this mock agency here we're looking at has 1.5 policies per account. That's actually about average, but it's also pretty low if you think about the number of policies that people could purchase from most independent agents. So there's some room for growth there. Revenue per account, $120, that's also pretty low. So looking at this, we might decide, you know what, we need to do something to further develop our customer relationships, our revenue, all those kinds of things. Part of the worksheet also was this sales source. Again, where do we think our business came from last year by percentage? And then there's a formula in there that breaks out the number of policies by source. So those first two where the arrows are referrals, that's related to your current clients, and obviously account development. So we're selling additional coverage or policies per account or whatever, right? Or maybe cross-selling across lines of business. Those things came from that sort of customer development, customer relationship building. So we're going to talk about these things in turn on the remainder of this webinar. Who are your customers? It might sound like an obvious question, but it really isn't. Conversations I've had for years with agents tell me that's not an obvious question. Account longevity, share of wallet, and profit, the relationship between those things. How do you measure satisfaction? What we call the loyalty ladder. Top of mind when you're combating somebody that has a huge advertising budget like Geico. How do you do that? What's your value proposition? What are the different channels for customer communication? What content is appropriate to those channels, right? And then really, what are your tactical options for your agency? So that's kind of roughly the agenda we'll go through. So who are your customers? What I have here on the slide is a response I get often. You know, personal lines, commercial lines, whatever, auto, home, BOP, general liability. Those are products, right? Those are not customers. That's what people buy. Customers are the people who buy them. There's a difference, obviously. So a little easier to segment commercial area, but there are segments within personal lines as well, right? So families, what are their needs? So they have young kids, maybe they have older kids going off to school, driving for the first time. So their risk profile is a little bit different. What they need to be thinking about with their insurance is a little bit different than, say, mature drivers or people who are retired or about to retire. They're downsizing. They may travel a little bit more. So it's not a one-size-fits-all. Their needs are a little bit different. They have a little bit, what they have at stake is different. Maybe it's assets with the mature group. Maybe it's future income with families, right? So you need to address that a little bit differently. And then obviously with commercial, the segmentation is a little more straightforward. So we could have manufacturers, contractors, daycare centers, right, medical professionals, whatever. Small business, different needs than medium business, right, different budget, different products that respond a little less complexity, generally speaking. So that's when we say, who are your customers? It's a good exercise to go through. Who are your customers? Who do you want them to be? Who do you want to get more of? Why would you do that? The more you can segment, the more it allows you to become an expert, a specialist, right? I understand your needs. I understand products and services that are responsive to your needs. That's how we're going to communicate to you. We're not a one-size-fits-all agency, right? We're able to kind of segment. The more granular you can get with these target customer definitions, it's easier to be clear with your value proposition, your messages, the channels you're going to use, the communications. Everything gets easier once you've done that. It can be a challenging exercise sometimes to start to go through and define your target customer segments, the ones you really want. But everything will get easier. It's much more challenging for generalist agencies. Not saying there's not a place for generalist agencies, there are, but customer development, really other kinds of marketing, is much more difficult when we have a generalist agency. Okay. I've used the term a couple of times, value proposition. What is that anyway? So I had a boss years ago, and I suppose some of you on this call might even know him. He's retired now a few years, Ray Snyder. And this is something I borrowed from him, and I've just sort of kept it with me. Your value proposition is what makes you demonstrably different and better than the alternative. And that word demonstrably is pretty important, right? So we can say how we're different, but can we show it in some way, right? And when you talk about the alternative, people can go to the independent agency down the street. They can go to the captive agency around the corner. They can go online to Insurance Noodle or Geico or whatever. There are alternatives, and you're not the same as those alternatives. And if you think you are, you probably need to think about it a little bit more. And if you apply a little bit of thought, you'll probably realize that maybe you're not quite the same. Okay, so I got a little pop-up here, and there's a hand icon, which means something. I think somebody has a question, maybe. So Lexi, if you do have a question, if you want to just type it in the message box, I'll see it, and I'll do my best to respond to it. Okay. Positive correlation, right? So these things are all related. You get more of one, you're going to get more of the other. Share of wallet, policies that customers buy from you. The more policies you have per account, the longer people stay with you, so retention gets better, right? The more people stay with you, the more loyalty they have. That usually results in referrals. And the last item, or number 4 on the list, the soft referrals, is something that's relatively new. So in the old days, right, and most all of us have heard this statistic, you were happy with a product or service, you probably told on average 3 people about that. If you were unhappy, on average, you told 9 people. And today, consumers have a huge megaphone. I can leave reviews on Google+, on Yelp, on CitySearch, on any number of websites. Those are the soft referrals. If you have those kinds of reviews and they're positive, you get leads. If you have them and they're negative, you don't get leads. And sometimes if you don't have any at all, you don't get leads, right? So if you get business through these sources, through the accounts, right, it costs you less money to acquire them. They're kind of more of a known quantity. They're generally more profitable accounts, and the acquisition costs are lower as well. So the customer loyalty ladder, just to illustrate that with a graphic, customers on the left who are more loyal, right, engender greater profit and faster growth, and they exhibit the behaviors on the right. They refer others, they buy more stuff from you, they stick around longer. So That's kind of the case for customer development, right? So if you were going to try and figure out how your customers felt about you, and you could only ask one question, this would be it. Right? Would you refer other people to us? Corollary, whatever that means, at the bottom, we tend to hang around with people that are kind of like ourselves. We do. So if you've been able to segment your customers and identify some people that you really want to target, you want to grow more, right, in these areas, and you build a relationship, a stronger relationship with those clients, when you do get referrals, you're going to get referrals that look like the target market you're trying to cultivate, right? So as you communicate with people, you're going to get more of the same when you get referrals. This was on the agenda. How do you compete with $1 billion, that's not a typo, a $1 billion advertising budget? That's about where Geico is. It's about where they've been the last few years. They're everywhere, right? Every sports event you go to, radio, TV, print, publication, doesn't matter what you pick up, they're there. So what you don't want to happen when somebody's thinking about insurance is for them to think about Geico first. Another thing we've all seen, and I can't remember if these are J.D. Power surveys, there's a variety of them. When consumers are asked, who do you have your insurance with, quite often the answer they give is the company they're insured with, not the agency, right? You don't want that. You want people, when they're asked, who's your insurance with, you want the answer to be your agency. You want people, when they have some kind of insurance need, to think more about you. You can't spend $1 billion to do that, but the good news is, by spending hundreds or possibly thousands, just depending on what you do, you can stay top of mind with your clients because you have other direct communication channels with them. But you have to communicate, because Geico and other people are out there doing it every day. Right. So how do you score today? This is a graphic that we had from the last webinar as well. If you have a Confluency website, this report card is there. It goes out automatically. We encourage you to send it as well. We're not going to talk a lot about that. This reputation management and building referrals from that, kind of something that falls in the cracks in between customer development and kind of green growth development. So we're going to talk about it more next webinar. We did talk about it a little bit last webinar. So D's and A's. What's the difference between agencies that get a lot of D's on their report card? And we've got over 3,000 of these that have been completed, over 200 agencies participating. And the short answer is just contact with clients. If we put these on a distribution like this, it's a bell curve. It's a normal distribution. No surprises there. The agents that get D's and F's, kind of the bottom 10%, really don't have any communication programs in place. They're not doing anything. The agents that are in the top 10% have the most communications. Could be a newsletter, could be annual reviews, could be some different things, right? But they are communicating, and that's really, that's the difference between the agencies on the left and right hand sides of the bell curve. When we first looked at this, when we first put this study together, my hypothesis was we were going to see a lot of coastal agents with D's and F's, right? The more difficult states, difficult markets, because nobody's happy about insurance in those places. And then on the right hand of the bell curve, we thought we would see more agents located in states with a stable insurance environment. But that turned out not to be true. It really just kind of broke down to who communicates and who doesn't. So what do you communicate? And there's some options here. On this slide, what we're suggesting is, one thing you can communicate is who you are. What do you stand for? That's your brand, right? Most of us are local businesses. We're located in our communities. We're involved in our communities. That's an easy thing to communicate about. There's a whole bunch of things on this slide, right? Local sports teams, high school team, whatever, support our troops. Is your staff volunteering in anything? You're doing any fundraising, participating in charitable boards you might sit on, anything, right? That's one option. Another thing you can communicate about is, what do you do? So this is that thing that kind of makes you demonstrably different and better, right? Service. Do we actually do annual reviews or biannual reviews or whatever? You don't necessarily have to do them. They don't necessarily have to be over the phone or in person. You can use a form. We have one on the website. But you need to at least make an offer. You need to let people know. And along the way, is there a way for you to deliver value-added information about safety, risk management? I can save money by going to Geico, and I'm probably going to do that because my limits are going to be lower, right? People learn that the hard way. But you can tell them in advance and maybe save some people from going to Geico, right? So that's what do? You do the service, you do the education, who you are, what you stand for. That's the other part of it. Right? How can you communicate with clients? There's really when it's customer development, it's a little bit more limited. This is a chart that I pulled from a blog post that we did a couple of years ago. So on the left-hand side of this table, we've got some different digital marketing tactics. PPC, that's pay-per-click. SEO, that's search engine optimization. If you go over to the left, those last two columns that are in yellow, that's where you get new clients. And that and local search optimization, the third row on the table, those really only address green growth. So those tactics, which you can engage in, and everybody probably should at least think about, is this part of our mix or not? But those aren't going to do anything for your customers. They're not going to build your relationship. They're not going to expand the revenue and improve your retention, all that stuff. It's just directed at new clients. The last two items on the list, and when I talk about email, it's really putting something together that's systematic. It's a process. We don't really have to think about it. We put it in place and it just kind of goes, versus sending emails on a one-off account basis. So if you use email or social media, and we'll talk a little bit more, we'll break down social media a little bit more, but that can address everything. Retention policies or commission per account, right? Customer development, as well as new clients through referrals or sources that aren't referrals. So it's really just those last two items for customer development. So you can send email, you can post to Facebook, you can do whatever. There are right ways and wrong ways to think about this. There are right ways and wrong ways to do this. All right, so what we have on this slide are two little screen clips from analytics on two different agency websites. And if I just told you the agency on the left has 165 Facebook fans and the one on the right has 1,236 and didn't give you any information and asked you which agency you would rather be, every one of us would choose to be the agency on the right. And we've seen a lot of agents engage in, quote, social media marketing, unquote, through third parties or whatever. And the one metric that's really easy to get your hands on is, how many fans do I have? Is it more than I had yesterday? So everybody goes head hunting, and we look at that and we say, ain't that great? We got lots of fans. But if those fans never do anything, they don't really transact business with you, they're not sharing anything about your agency with anybody else, does it really help you? So the agency on the left had 7% of their fans visit over a 30-day period, 165 fans. The agency on the right had less than 1%, 0.16%, visit over a 75-day period, over twice as long, right? So, I would look at that and say, I don't know what you're doing, but you got to at least conjecture it's not working because nobody's visiting. And that's where the transactions happen on the website. You can get people to your website in a variety of ways, through the emails you send out, through social media, through SEO, and some of those other things we looked at. But if you're doing these things and nobody's going to your website, then you're probably not transacting business. And ultimately, just to be cynical about this, that's kind of where we want to go. So why is that? Why the difference between the agency on the left and the right, when the agency on the right seems to have such an advantage, so many more fans? And this kind of gets to the right way and the wrong way. So the agency on the left is posting a lot of stuff that talks about who they are, what they do in the community, right? And the result is they get visits to their website, they get much more engagement. The agency on the right posts, about 3 times a week, but it's only about insurance. And apparently, on Facebook, that's not what people want to see in their newsfeed. So they just kind of go on past. And that's really the difference between these two. All right, so communication mediums for your clients, and I've got some things in here that are not digital, analog. So social and email, we talked about that. There's still a place for snail mail, but it's expensive. So if you can use your digital marketing to kind of, filter out people who are maybe not so interested or not as receptive to your message, and then if you're going to use snail mail, you just kind of identify a subset of clients you're going to send to. Organizations and networking that you may belong to, that's communication medium, right? You get out there in front of people. Phone, can't discount that, whether it's telemarketing or whatever. But when I use the word phone, it's outbound, not inbound, right? And then what about yellow pages, traditional print ads, and those things? We're going to talk more about that in the next webinar. There's still a place for that, although it's dwindling and it's expensive relative to what's out there. And certainly for the print yellow pages, we talked about that the last webinar. For most agencies, there's not much of a place for that anymore. Each of these communication mediums, these digital marketing tactics, have an ROI, a return on investment risk profile, right? It's a little different. And the reason is related to those things that we have on the right. How much does it cost up front? Will I get my money back? Will I make money on my investment, right? How long before I see the results? You have to wait. SEO and social media, you have to wait a while to see the results. That's why we have a range there instead of just a solid bar like we do with email or local search. And then how difficult is it to actually measure our results, right? What do we see? So you want to make sure, particularly as things cost more and take longer, you want to make sure you have a really solid way of measuring the effectiveness of what you're doing. And you want to make sure that you're not misled by the measurements you're looking at. So again, if I'm looking at how many fans do we have, by itself, it's not a measurement that really tells you anything, right? You need to look at a couple of other things. So we want to make sure that we're looking at ROI, and we want to make sure we get our money back and make some money. These are some things we need to keep in mind. What's it cost? How long is it going to take before we see results, before we know if it's paying off? And do we believe what we're able to measure? Do we believe it really tells us something? So for social and customer engagement, Facebook is fairly universal on young, old, male, female. I mean, there are breakdowns. I think there's more men on Facebook than women. I've seen some stats recently. I can't remember. But, there's a lot of different folks. A lot of your customers are on Facebook. You're probably on Facebook. That's fine. But as we saw a few slides ago, there are some things that are appropriate to communicate on Facebook, some things not so much. And just in case I wasn't clear, because I don't think I was, it's okay to have insurance, education, safety, risk management stuff in Facebook. It just can't be the only thing you have out there, right? So maybe every fourth or fifth post or something like that. LinkedIn, more business to business. So if you have a commercial book of business or you're looking to build your commercial book, you can get in front of people. You want to engage with your customers, let them know you're on LinkedIn, go looking for them, ask them to connect in you, post there once in a while. There are groups on LinkedIn, right, that are specific to architects, contractors, golf course administrators, whatever. Twitter is much more limited. It can be effective, but it's more limited partly because there's just fewer users on Twitter. And Instagram and Vine, similarly, you can be effective with that, but it really doesn't fit the style for most agencies. Instagram is kind of a photo sharing social platform for those of us not familiar with it, and Vine is short videos, really short video clips, kind of the GIFs, right? And then Google Plus, predominantly male, I think about 70%, much more technical, so you'll find people who are, developers and computer geeks and photographers and whatever there. However, as Google has kind of tried to figure out what to do with Google Plus over the years, they've added to it. It is a Google property. It does show up in search. Your Google profile will show up in search. Things that you post to Google Plus as a post. In fact, we started using our Google Plus page as our blog. We've moved away from WordPress, and maybe that'll work for us, and maybe it won't. I think it will. But Google will surface these things in search, right? So this may not engage a lot of your clients, but Google Plus is something you need to think about for other reasons. And again, that's something we'll talk about in webinar 3 upcoming. And then Pinterest, again, it's kind of a niche thing, but if you're trying to get a handle on who somebody is, what they're interested in, you get just a real kind of solid one-to-one look at that kind of information. If you want to cultivate a relationship with somebody that you don't know or you'd like to get to know better, take a look and see what they're putting on Pinterest. It'll give you something to talk about. But again, limited use because it's more one-to-one. Just depends on your kind of your sales model and your operating model. Email, still the highest ROI of pretty much any contact program that you could do or digital marketing program you could do. Again, it does apply to prospects as well as customers. If you set it up the right way, the way we set it up allows us to kind of put prospects in the customer nurture sequence, and we do that. And it allows you to leverage content. So you have blog posts, you have things that you find on Facebook or other places. You don't have to create a whole lot of content, and we all have a lot of content, more than we really think. Our insurance carriers, our associations, our own website, there's a lot of blog posts that you can, dust off after 2 years, and it still has relevance. Just as an aside, we're not quite halfway there yet, but we're about to the point where half of people read email on mobile devices, and you have to wonder, have mobile devices really kind of given email a second life? And you want to just bear in mind that more and more email is read on mobile devices as you design the emails that go out. Make sure that they're easy to read quickly on a mobile device, that the most important information is right there without me having to scroll too much. So, I get ahead of myself a little bit? Maybe. Yeah, we talked about this last time too. So you can't do everything, right? Can't do everything. We don't have unlimited bank accounts. We don't have all the time in the world. You can pay somebody else to do stuff, and that's fine. Makes sense. You can pay us, you can pay somebody else, but there's still a limitation, right? So you need to just kind of choose your spots. And we've talked about a lot of these things in the last webinar as well as here. Who is your target audience? Again, I can't emphasize how much easier everything gets if you can identify a couple of segments within kind of personal insurance, couple within commercial, right? Then it's easier to identify what they want to hear and what you're going to tell them. You can also identify how you're going to reach them, what channels are appropriate. Email is appropriate for most people, but LinkedIn is going to be more appropriate than Facebook for some things, and then Google Plus has a place as well. And then finally, once you've determined that stuff, what will it cost, and is it working? So we took one look at that. Is it working? How are we going to know with the analytics screenshot? So we can look and see how many people are going to our website. That's a transactional indicator. Doesn't mean I got a lead. Doesn't mean somebody bought something from me. But right, when I started insurance as an underwriter, and we had this big fat underwriting manual because that's just the way things were done back in the day. And the people that wrote the underwriting guidelines thought they're all frustrated writers. So look, just because you have a sports car doesn't mean you're going to speed. But we think that people buy sports cars to take advantage of their performance characteristics. They couldn't just say, sports cars are on the list. They had to fluff it up a little bit. Same thing with this, though. People are going back to your website for some reason, something they couldn't get on Facebook, and most likely they're interested in a product or having you do something for them. But further upstream from that, there's likes, shares, and comments. So if you're getting some level of engagement, and it's easy to see that, it's easy to check, Facebook provides stats for that, then you're probably doing the right thing. If you're not getting any engagement, if the only people liking your posts are you, your mother and wife, or your, whatever, your staff, then it's probably not working, right? Probably need to rethink what you're doing. Email, is it working? How do we know? Most every email service out there, we use MailChimp, we've used iContact, we've used Constant Contact, and a couple others over the years. They all will give you basic stats, right? How healthy is our list? And I've got to tell you, most of us, if we haven't done anything to keep our client email list up to date, it's probably a little bit stale. People change their primary email address about once every 3 years, right? So if you haven't done anything, odds are 30% of your emails are just going to bounce, or if they don't bounce, they're not going to get read because it's not a primary mail account for me, right? So most every email service will tell you your list is growing or not, your bounce rate, right? So the email didn't get there, just came right back. Opt-outs, that gives you some sense of list health. Opens and clicks, right? And there's an art and a science to this. Who opens my email? Why? Well, they open it because the subject line was good. They open it because I understood what they wanted to hear. They open it because they know who I am. There's a variety of reasons for that. But that's something I can look at and say, yeah, okay, this is working. In fact, on this one, you'll notice, it may be hard to see, the topmost arrow, 34.6%, this is again from MailChimp, list average 21.9% open rate. So this email, whatever it was, got a little higher open rate. And below that, the industry average for this category, who are we sending this to? This is B2B, 14.7%. So we're far exceeding the open rate for the industry, so that's good, right? And then clicks. And if I want to drill down, I can see who's opened it, what did they click on, right? And you can set up rules to kind of give you some sense for these people are, further down in the buying funnel or whatever. If they've opened something 3 times or opened up 3 consecutive emails or they've clicked on certain links, whatever it might be. But those things are all available through email. And that's one thing you want to look at as you're doing really any program. How am I going to measure whether this is working before I actually get the leads? Or if I have a hard time drawing the connection between the social media or email activity and the leads, you want an ability to really measure positive activity further upstream. The nice thing about social and email is that they do give you those kind of stats. All right, so we've gone through this discipline. We've defined our segments, our target market. We know what they want to hear. We're going to tell them. We know how we're going to reach them. We've established our budget. We know how we're going to tell if it's going to work or not. What else do we need? Is there anything missing? And the answer is, yeah, there is something missing. You kind of need a plan. So you just need to put this on paper, right? Pick your channels, how often we communicate. This one that's in italics, the last one, second to the last one rather. What is our editorial schedule? And again, this is something it surfaced last webinar. It'll surface again the next one. It should be part of any marketing plan today. We talked about this, and I probably should have included a slide last time. We've moved kind of far, far away from the way marketing was done in most agencies 10, 15, 20 years ago. It was kind of a once-a-year exercise. The Yellow Page guy came in, you gave him some money, put an ad in the Yellow Pages, sat back and answered the phone once a year. It's not like that anymore. Everything's ongoing. And most of the agencies we work with are kind of up to their eyeballs in stuff they have to do. We get that. But if you can just kind of sit down once a year and say, okay, let's try to keep this sane. What are we going to do? We've answered these questions. Who are we communicating with, about what channels, et cetera. And then we have an editorial schedule. So let's identify the content we have. Let's start there. And then who we're going to share that with, when, and through which channel. So this is an email editorial schedule or send schedule. But you'll notice the first column, January, who we're going to send to, PCN, that's personal customer nurture, email 1, so there's a separate document that has whatever email 1 is. When are we going to send it? We're going to send it on the 19th. Who's going to get it? Personalized customers, right? And so on. If we get on to April, maybe we want to send a nice, hey, here's what Earth Day is in this community. Here's what goes on. We've already got the email written. If nothing else, we've got a blog post on that we can share, right? Who's going to get it? When are they going to get it? Back over to February, there's one on flood, so you might want to sprinkle a couple of sort of errors and omissions email items in these as well. Okay, so that's the editorial schedule, one for each channel, so we know who we're going to communicate with, when we're going to do it, and what we're going to communicate. Doesn't have to be, and you can change it. Once you've got it laid out, right, you can go back and change it later on. Some opportunity comes up. Okay, so that's kind of really all we have time for here. Again, we'll have the date. Hopefully I'll have it maybe in the next day or two even, when we send out the follow-up email with the recording, with the slide set for this webinar. For webinar 3, we'll have the date for that, green growth. So we've got some time. think. I don't see any questions right now, but I pretty much stayed more or less within my 35 minutes, 36, I guess. So if you do have any questions, feel free to go ahead and type them in the chat box on the right. I'll stay around. Ken will stay around for a little bit. If you think of some questions or comments after the fact, after you're off, there's my email address, there's Ken's email address. You'll be receiving an email from me with the follow-up information, so you'll be able to respond to that as well. But if you need to get back to your to-do list and your work for the afternoon, thanks for taking a few minutes out. Hope you got something out of it. We'll be doing some more of these, and your feedback on what you thought about the webinar is also important. I'm going to go ahead and turn the recording off.